Bill tells Richard about some trouble which has broken out downstairs as two men, matching the description of a quad, came inside and started wrecking up the place, looking for a woman matching Kahlan's description. Richard and Kahlan both realized that the wizard trouble Zed sent to take care of the quad wasn't enough to get the job done. Bill tells them that one of them was torn up pretty good, his arm was in a sling, and he had big cuts, which didn't seem to bother him too much. Bill says that when the two men made it clear they were looking for Kahlan, a fight broke out among the men downstairs as they argued about who was going to do what with Kahlan, and the red-haired man quickly slit the injured quad member's throat, killing him instantly. The innkeeper says the other healthy member of the quad retaliated by cutting down of his other customers before disappearing faster than one of two socks, which definitely enter a washing machine together, but somehow vanishes without a trace, never to be heard from again. Bill warns them that the rest of the men who weren't killed also don't seem to be too bothered by a pile of bodies and a pool of blood, are currently arguing over who gets to be first when it comes to taking an uninvited shot at the pretty woman upstairs, who obviously was lying about hiring the services of a gigolo and must be taught a lesson for fooling them. With trouble brewing downstairs faster than trouble brews for many of us downstairs after a morning cup of coffee, with only minutes to spare, all of them make a quick turn of the page. They all make a quick, effortless turn of the page, which works on the first try, and make a coordinated escape out the back door, which in retrospect is really the same thing which happens after the consumption of the previously mentioned cup of coffee. With the bigger one taken care of first and splashed down onto the litter in the muddy waters, once again the back door is used to secure the exit of the troublemaker Zed. And much like the early morning troublemaker, the second passage is significantly more difficult than the first, as the door is momentarily blocked with a mud-covered obstacle. The red-haired man tries to sneak attack Richard, but because he's taking his time paying attention and not trying to force the exodus of the troublemaker, he is able to spot the dangerous blockage standing in his way and avoid a stabbing pain. And Richard isn't having any of that noise, so he draws the sword of truth to get the man to hold his horses for a minute while he thinks about what he did on his knees in the mud. Then Richard turns the sword of truth and clocks the guy in the head, knocking him out cold. After the red-haired man is unconscious in a heap, Kahlan finds Randy on the ground with his swollen eye. And while that is mud in his pockets, he is happy to see Kahlan. He apologizes and says the man took him by surprise. Kahlan gives him a quick hug that he will most likely be fantasizing about for decades to come and says, "Don't worry about it." Kahlan gives Randy some silver to pay for the other half of her horse care, and Richard, still very angry from having drawn the sword of truth and using it, even in a non-lethal fashion, yells at Bill. He says, add everything to his tally books, the damage to his property, the trouble to him and the time it would take to fix, grave markers for the criminals and rapists, and whatever he thinks is a fair fee for saving their lives. He also isn't above playing the first counselor's brother card when it will help him do the right thing. He says if they won't pay, he will find the man responsible and have his head on a pike in front of his brother's own home. Bill thinks that's the funniest thing he's ever heard, but Richard's still furious that the red-haired man is passed out in the mud and says the only reason he didn't kill him was because by killing the quad member, he may have saved Kahlan's life. Richard tells Bill that even though he was useful in one very specific instance, once he wakes up and starts acting on his own again, he's liable to start wrecking up the place. Better to make sure he never wakes up again by hanging him. And also, be careful because the boundary's failing. Bill doesn't seem to have a problem with taking advice from Richard about this and decides it's a good idea. Then he reveals that he knew Richard was the seeker of truth the entire time, causing Richard to realize he was wrong about Bill's devious nature. Richard and Kahlan leave South Haven and travel down the road under cover of darkness. Even though it's dark and rainy, the horses are all like rain and darkness. What? They aren't bothered by it at all, since they are trained to handle this kind of duty. Thick gray clouds, all heavy with rain, follow Richard and Kahlan as they travel to find 80, the bone woman. As they ride, Richard is full of worry. He's worried about the last member of the quad striking them when they aren't ready. He's worried about his friends, and the more he worries about those things, the more he is able to come up with even more things to worry about, until eventually he remembers some good advice from an old, trusted, and currently unconscious friend. Worry about what is, not what might be. And once he starts doing this, it turns out to be a wise decision because there are a lot of very real things he should be thinking about, like what the murder of his father means and how he's going to help his friends, and what's the deal with the woman he's with. After traveling in the rain for some time, Richard notices the terrain has changed somehow. He describes it as looking the same yet being presented differently, transformed from a place of terror into a place of peace, using the same building blocks in a different way. A smell of birch smoke fills the air as Richard narrates that the men from the inn wouldn't be near this place because their mere presence would be a violation just by comparison alone. They aren't good enough to be here. 80's house is described as one which blends into its surroundings, almost indistinguishable from the forest around it. The house is described as appearing to grow from the forest floor and is surrounded by ferns. The house has a simple roof and a porch good enough for sitting on. None of the windows in 80's house have any curtains. Standing in the middle of a patch of ferns, right in the middle of the path, they see a tall woman who is taller than Kahlan and is definitely taller than Kahlan. No matter how many times I read the damn stories, Hollywood has forever taken the archetype of wise old woman and turned her into this short and hunched over thing, which 80 clearly is not, but damn it if it didn't take me a long time to override that TV trope presentation. She is described as a strong woman with handsome features, old and grizzled but not used up. She is also missing a foot. The woman gives one of the best self-introductions in recent literary history when she says, "I be 80, who be you?" And Richard says, "It's just 4 friends, nothing to worry about here," even though one of those people she knows, the one person that she knows at all, is tied to a wooden sled with blood on his face being dragged through the mud, alongside of another unconscious person and 2 people she doesn't know. 80 corrects Richard and reminds him that there are 3 strangers in front of her and 1 friend, and that she is allowed to decide if the rest of them are friends or not. Richard decides now is a good time to literally and figuratively get off his high horse and introduce himself and Kahlan to 80 on equal ground. 80 gives Richard the once-over and then turns her focus on Kahlan and addresses her in a language Richard doesn't fully understand, and uses her full title. Kahlan is on high alert. While Richard can't understand the words, he compares Kahlan to a feisty feline on high alert. Feline, feeling fine, feline, la 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 la, feline. He also notices they are testing each other in ways he doesn't understand feline. He also notices that he needs 80's help, and if she wanted to, she could harm them. And he realizes that the sword of truth wouldn't be of any use against this blind old woman. Richard is so surprised by 80's immediate rejection of his statement as true that he is blind to the reason she said it. Instead of asking her what she means, he feels like he must not have used the right word, so he tries to say the same thing again. He says the supplies are there and we thought, but 80 isn't having any of that noise and says lie, again, punctuated with another cane thumping. Richard does the same thing everyone else does when someone has a different point of view that they don't accept as presented. He gets annoyed, crosses his arms, and with his internal temper rising, he asks her, albeit grudgingly, to tell him where the lie is. 80 tells him it wasn't a group decision to bring her supplies, it was his decision. He should have used the word I instead of we. Richard looks at 80 and doesn't see the problem. And 80 sees the problem, but she can't look at Richard. She tells him one is the truth and one is not. And that's a big enough difference to make the distinction worth the trouble in her eyes. She can see that 80 thinks it's time well spent. Richard says Chase must have a hard time indulging any of his nonsense with her. 80 confirms that is the truth and tells Richard to bring his friends inside. Once Chase and Zed are taken inside, Richard can see why 80 is called the Bone Woman. He sees bones in all shapes and sizes decorating the walls. He notices that many of them look like they belong to scary-looking inhuman monsters. Some of them are piled up in the corner on the floor like scraps of leftover wood, potentially useful to have access to, but not nearly as important or refined as the more finished and important pieces on the wall. Chase and Zed are brought inside, and Richard notices that 80 is dry, even though she was standing out with them in the rain. That makes Richard nervous, and he thinks he wouldn't be here if he didn't trust Chase as much as he does. When Richard lays Zed down, 80 asks who that person he is laying down is, and Richard tells 80 the truth to the question she asked by giving his name, and the truth by answering a question she didn't ask when he says he is a friend. 80 gets Richard to yell at her by saying the word wizard, and Richard repeats the important part of this interaction from his perspective by shouting back that he is a friend. 80 takes her hands and puts them on his stomach, swirling it around before taking it back and announcing that his anger comes from the proper place, the truth, and that the good don't need to fear that. She does the same thing by placing her hand on Kahlan and says that Kahlan has the anger of the tongue and that everyone needs to fear it, including Kahlan, if she ever lets it out. But Richard isn't having any of that noise, and he says he doesn't understand, and then blames her for not telling him the things she sees clearly in words that he can understand. So Adie does what any good teacher would do when a student says they don't understand the lesson. She uses different words to try and make her point. She tries to answer the question in the form of a question and ask what type of magic is stronger, the magic of the truth or the teeth? The magic of the tongue, words. Which one is better, Mr. Richard Cipher? Richard lets Adie know that he still doesn't understand by making fun of the exercise, and that then she does what any good teacher would do in her situation. She tries to use different words to make the same point when she tells him to put a sock in it and think before he speaks, Fnord. Richard gets embarrassed, and Adie feels like she has made some progress in helping him understand, but has not yet achieved total victory. She asks him if he understands that she bonked him over the head with it, and he says he doesn't. But then he acts like he does by actually paying attention to the words coming out of her mouth. Adie considers his progress and proceeds to explain that the magic of the truth is violent. It's forceful. It rips and destroys by contact and direct interaction, and that the magic of the tongue can be just as destructive, Fnord, but doesn't need to make contact to do so. Richard still isn't sure what she means, but this time, instead of making fun of her example, she tells her that he isn't sure what she means, and she touches him with a little bit of honesty, and he gets a vision of the men in South Haven and how he was ready to use his power to kill them to stop them, and how Kahlan was able to use the power of her words to accomplish the same thing without killing them. Kahlan isn't taking kindly to Adie putting her hand on Richard to kindly help him remember exactly what he needs to remember to understand what she was trying to tell him. So she not so kindly puts her hand on Adie and gives the blind old woman some knowledge that if she doesn't explain what she's doing to Richard, and quick, she will have bigger problems on her hands than arguing over how many people decided to get her supplies in exchange for help. Kahlan tries to remain respectful and does realize she may be overreacting a bit, but she isn't about to be taking any chances with the only seeker of truth that she has. Adie takes a moment to look at the situation and tells Kahlan, and I quote, "Forgive me, child, for thoughtlessly giving you cause for alarm." The old woman removes her hand from Richard, and Kahlan responds by removing her hand from Adie. This becomes much more of a strong warning. What the symbolism here is saying is a misguided sense of justice has the power to destroy honesty. Adie explains that the magic of truth, the teeth, work together with the magic of the tongue, words. She also says having access to the magic of the truth gives him the magic of the tongue because he backs it with the truth. She looks at Kahlan slowly and tells her she has both the magic of the teeth and the magic of the tongue, with one backing the other. Understanding about the choices they really have led them to destroy their own ability to think rationally. So if someone abuses this knowledge on another person, they can actually make them less rational. That's what Adie is talking about here. That's the danger that is represented by Kahlan using one to back the other. Adie takes a minute to give Kahlan a warning about the true power she has inside her. She calls it the true power of the tongue and tells her it will be a terrible thing if she ever lets it out. Kahlan doesn't know what that means, and Adie knows that's the truth. She mentions that Kahlan's mother is supposed to teach her about it, but wasn't able to do so before she died. But that doesn't mean she can't bring it out just because she doesn't know how. Kahlan didn't know her mother that well, and asks Adie if she could tell her anything about her. She also mentions being able to see the same green in her eyes that was in her mother's. We also find out that Adie gave Kahlan's mom a bone necklace to protect her unborn baby. Richard interrupts Kahlan's emotionally fulfilling journey into her family history as Adie shares a piece of her backstory and makes an impassioned plea for help from her. Notice how he doesn't demand, he doesn't guilt, doesn't lie or pressure her into saying yes. He does the exact same thing he did with Zed when he asked him for help stopping Dark and Rawl. He tells the truth and gives them the choice. Adie says she's already decided to help them and is already doing it. But Richard says, my wizard friend is getting worse, and Adie says to him, how the heck do you know what his wizard friend is doing anyways? She asks if Richard knows Kahlan's secret, if Kahlan knows Richard's secret, if Zed knows Richard's secret, if Richard knows Zed's secret, and then she calls them all blind and says she can see better than any of them. Symbolically, this tracks. Adie is the symbol for honesty. She is the eyes which see that which is true and that which is not. Integrity can be destroyed. Justice and pride can be hijacked. Self-reliance can be abused. But honesty either is or is not. The only thing which is destroyed when it isn't honest is honesty itself. Richard asks whose secret she actually knows, and she says just Kahlan's. And Richard is relieved because he's holding on to his secret very tightly. He's on the verge of panic when he thinks Adie might know it. When Adie is finished asking about secrets, she asks Richard if he knows how to heal his friends. Her point being, if he has no idea what is wrong with them and has no ability to heal them, then how can he know what must or must not be done to help them? Adie says by being inside her house, that is helping them to heal, and she will make sure they eat and drink enough so they can be kept alive until they recover. She also says that while they're awake, being fed and watered, they won't recognize him until they're better. Adie says Richard put some bones on them and uses some magic to make them wake up. Each of them gets a half a bucket of water to drink before they go back to sleep. Adie answered Richard's call for help with a request for some home cooking. Something about those with a gift in food, am I right? Richard is happy to be able to do something he understands to help, while Adie does her job of helping her friends. He cuts up some vegetables and lets Kahlan and Adie have a chat on the floor. Richard is a skilled sous chef and has all of the vegetables prepared before the women are done talking, which is much better for me to say than the women take far too long to talk, because I would never hear the end of that from our current PC culture. So Richard's an exceptionally skilled chef, and the women chat for an appropriate amount of time. He asks if Adie would let him cut some firewood, and then she says, wouldn't that be lovely? Don't forget to take your shirt off. I'm blind, so there's nothing to worry about here. Ah-cha-cha-cha-cha. Then Richard goes outside and makes most of the women happy, and some of the men, not that there's anything wrong with that, happy by removing his shirt and doing his best interpretation of a rugged, self-sufficient mountain man. Shapen nature with his bare hands, with only the forest, the trees, and the tools in his hands, and the sun glinting off of his rippling six-pack abs, and shoulders that would put the Greek god Atlas to shame. He feels safe here, but he doesn't forget about the problems he's facing. Kahlan comes outside to peek at a shirtless, muscular Richard, using the excuse that it's time to eat. Having lost track of the time, he realizes that he's a sweaty mess, but the camera used to shoot him has one of those special lenses that add shadow and muscle definition, so it only makes him look even more appealing. And say what you want about the guy, Terry Goodkind isn't above giving some of his readers a little fan service every now and again, as Richard literally pulls a bucket of water out of a well, and with a slow motion rotating 360-degree angle shot, he proceeds to pour said water over himself. We know Kahlan didn't see it, she was inside, but Adie can use her gift to see through the walls, and she saw all of it. When Richard comes back inside, she says, and this is a direct quote, "Richard, you have given me a wonderful gift." Richard has no idea what she's talking about, and she tells him by letting her chat with Kahlan in her own native language, she's given her something of value. Wink. Adie reveals that learning about Dark and Raw taking the boundaries down explains a lot of things, and she tells Richard he has to decide if he's going to go on or if he's going to wait for his friends to recover. Richard worries that it's too much for one old woman to do alone, and Adie says that it's all well and good, but this old woman needs these two young people to go out and stop Dark and Raw. But it has to be their choice. Kahlan keeps quiet because this isn't her choice to make, and Adie asks Richard what is his choice. Richard says he doesn't know enough to put his faith in anyone but himself, but he decides to go on without them. Adie says he is brave and that he's probably going to feel a lot less brave when all this is over because the path he's chosen is difficult beyond his worst fears. Richard takes comfort in the fact that Kahlan is there with him to help complete the team he needs to win. Adie tells them to eat up and eat hearty because before bedtime, she's going to tell them the story of how she lost her foot.